the introduction to dragonflies and damselflies of basically the North Merseyside area. I mean, there are many reasons for studying dragonflies and damselflies. A, they're active on nice, warm, sunny days. So, you hang out sort of in the nice weather. I mean, they are active when it's a bit dull, but, it's not as much fun. They're found almost in any freshwater habitat, as long as it's not too polluted. So you can get into some sort of nice bits of countryside, along nice bits of river or nice ponds or whatever. They're good indication of changes in the environment. Obviously, changes in what some of them have, distinct water requirements for the. I think somebody just walked past. The distinct requirements of pH of the water or water quality. So obviously, if a population of dragonflies disappears, I mean, it might be due to changes in the water. Something might have happened. I mean, a classic example of that was the white-faced darter in Delamere. It's a dragonfly which likes. It's a moorland species, so it likes acidic pools in particular, and it's only found in one lake in Delamere Forest. And the story is that a film company came along to do filming on the site, and they put some limestone blocks around it, and when it rained, it washed into the pond and it changed the pH, and the population disappeared. So the Wildlife Trust are now in a process of reintroducing the species onto that site. That's been going for a few years. Whether that's true or not, I'm not sure. It's a nice story. And I'll say there are also these good indicators of changes in climate as well. I mean, in the last few years, we've had about 4 new species of damselfly appear in Cheshire. They're all present in small numbers, but that's an indication of how things are moving. In fact, most dragonfly species are doing rather well at the moment. There are 1 or 2 that are declining, but on the whole, our dragonflies are, compared with a lot of insects, seem to be thriving. I mean, obviously, creating new habitat and managing it helps, but just climate change does seem to be moving lots of species north, and they are sort of settling down to breed. They're also a small group. There's only about 40 breeding species in the UK, so you don't have many to worry about. They're large. You don't have to stick them under a microscope and look at various bits of genitalia or hairs on the back legs and all this kind of malarkey. You can identify them with binoculars. I mean, most people who do dragonflies are basically bird people who've realised there's nothing to do during the summer, bird-wise, so you're sat either watching butterflies or dragonflies. I mean, basically, you can watch dragonflies with a decent pair of binoculars. Ideally, it helps if you get one with close focus, because if you get a decent approach, get close to them, you can see all the relevant details you need to see. Or failing that, you get a decent camera. I mean, most of them can be identified from a good photograph. So as far as and the other thing as well is, because of species are sort of moving up north, you can go out and there's always a chance you might find something new. And also, like birds, we do get vagrants. We get dragonflies from the continent. We even get dragonflies from Asia and North America. So there's always a chance of seeing something slightly out of the ordinary. And it's even better if you sort of hang around from the same spot year after year, so you can see how populations are established. So what I'll do tonight is mainly look at the identification of the different species that you'll have to find locally. First of all, distinguishing between dragonflies and damselflies. Obviously, damselflies are the small, rather dainty-looking insects. It's sort of generally less than sort of 5 centimeters long. Usually quite small. They're not particularly strong flyers. They sort of tend to fly short distances and then have to land again. Some are quite active, but then most of them sort of aren't particularly. They seem to be reluctant to fly, a lot of them, unless they're sort of after a mate. Though, if you see a dragonfly less. The vast majority, the wings are held parallel to the body, and they're actually the forewings and the hind wings are all more or less identical in shape. So that's a good clue. And if you look at them as well, on the head, the eyes are separated. The head's sort of an oblong with two eyes with an eye at each end. Whereas the dragonflies, they're the sort of robust insects. Some of them are quite large. I mean, the largest dragonfly is probably about getting on for 10 centimeters long. So you're not small, but obviously they do vary in size. The smallest one's probably about 3 or 4 centimeters. So there's quite a variation. Obviously they've got a very powerful flight, especially the big hawk dragonflies. They can sort of spend hours on the wing if necessary, which is a bit annoying if you're trying to photograph them. But that's the sort of thing you have to put up with. And the wings generally are held at right angles to the body when they're at rest. Although you might see them with the wings slightly pointing forward or tilted towards the sun if they're trying to warm up. And in most species, the eyes, you can see they're rather large and they actually meet in the middle. So they're sort of, so it's quite easy to distinguish most dragonflies and damselflies. Now, obviously, like most insects, you need to know the bits of the structure. Fortunately, it's not as complicated as doing flies and bees and wasps. But there are sort of things that are mentioned in the field guides and identification literature, that kind of thing. You've got the head, which has got the two big eyes. They've got very short antennae, sort of, they are hardly visible. The main thing you will read about is something called the fronds, which is this section here, because sometimes the colour of that can be distinctive for certain species. As I say, on the white-faced dragonfly, it's obviously white, whereas another it sort of might be blue or green. It's not a feature that's used particularly often. The thorax is can be quite distinctive. A lot of dragonflies and damselflies have what we call antihumeral stripes, which are basically just stripes on the side of the abdomen, but they are different colours, they are different widths, and they might be broken or they might be continuous. So they're something to look at for some of the bigger dragonflies in particular. Obviously, the sort of wings, the main features to look at for there is the costa, which is a thick vein which is along the front edge of the wing. Sometimes that's a distinct colour in certain species, so that could be a useful feature. And there's what's called a pterostigma, which is a little darkened cell towards the end of the wing. This can vary in colour in different species. It might be black, it might be white, or it might be black and white. So that's a feature that you can use to distinguish between the two. And then there's the abdomen, which is 10 segments long, and we number them S1 to S10 as you go down the length of the insect. So basically, you'll see in the field guides, you might mention S3 has a distinct marking on it on certain species. I mean, S2, that one there, usually in certain damselflies in particular, that has markings which can distinguish between the species, or perhaps male and female. And then S9 and S10 are mentioned quite often because things like blue-tailed damselflies, obviously the tail is blue, so it usually corresponds with S9. And S10, you've got the two pair of appendages. These are where the male grabs the female and the female grabs the male when mating takes place. The other thing you might see mentioned is something called a pronotum, which is just at the very rear of the thorax. It's a distinct shape in each species. The idea is that's where the male grabs the female. So obviously you don't want a shape that's similar in two species. You might get problems. So, but they are, you can distinguish a species if you can look at that, especially amongst the blue damselflies, because there's lots of them which all look the same. But so there's the sort of things to look at. I mean, the legs, sometimes you can sort of distinguish different species because of the leg colour, but it's not a particularly common feature. Most of them seem to have the same coloured legs. Generally, the legs are usually one colour, but sometimes you might have bits of stripes on them as well, which you can use to distinguish certain species. So they're the things you're sort of looking for when you're trying to identify the different species, and when you're looking through your field guides or whatever. One thing to bear in mind, once a dragonfly's emerged from its exuviae, as we call it, it doesn't actually have its actual colours. It's the juvenile dragonfly, or a teneral, as we call it. It lasts for about several days after the dragonflies emerged, and basically they're just a dull colour. There's no markings on them at all, and they just tend to hide away, so you don't really find them very often. And until then, they sort of, for that period of time, they'll gradually take on their sort of adult coloration. You can identify some of them, like what time of year they emerge, or what the habitat is, or the size. But for the damselflies in particular, it can be a bit confusing. That one you can tell from the size and shape is a common darter dragonfly. So that's one that's relatively straightforward. But I mean, it can cause confusion if you see this sort of dull-looking dragonfly with no colour on it. I tend to ignore it. Hopefully it'll come back in a few days. So we'll go through the different species we're likely to find in this area. Banded demoiselle is one of the sort of it's the largest of, well, the damselflies we're likely to come across. It's quite a robust insect. When we're discussing the habitat, this is the breeding habitat for this species. It likes slow-flowing rivers and streams and canals, often with a muddy substrate. So places to see this locally are Sankey Valley Park, and I think it's along the Leeds-Liverpool Canal. They're the best places to see breeding populations. But it's generally found throughout most of lowland England and Wales. It's on the wing now, so probably, if you go to these sites, you're likely to see it. Now, one thing about certain species of dragonfly, once they've sort of mated, they do tend to wander around a bit, and this is one of those species. So you can actually come across this miles away from any breeding habitat. I mean, I've had 2 records in the garden this year, and the nearest breeding population, as far as I know, is about 2 miles away. So don't be surprised if you come across this when you're out and about. It's usually just single males wandering around, even mated. They've just got nothing better to do. Dragonflies don't live very long. 8 weeks to 4 months is probably a good going as far as most of them are concerned. Damselflies, you're looking 2 weeks maybe. I mean, they tend to sort of succumb to predation after about that, after that time, if they haven't already worn themselves out. The other thing to bear in mind is some dragonflies, as they get older, the colours will fade as well, and the wings get all tatty and lose their sort of patterns or whatever. So the male on the left is this metallic blue insect with this sort of dark, looks like a fingerprint on the wing. It seems to sort of vary. The amount of blue varies in size at different times of the year as well. So some of them, the early ones, tend to have quite small patches. It tends to get larger as the season goes on. Whereas the females, this sort of iridescent green colour with sort of greenish wings, and there's a little whitish spot there. There is a relative of this species, about the beautiful demoiselle, which the male has all blue wings and the female's got sort of brownish wings, but with a very obvious a very bright white spot at the tip. That's very rare in Lancashire. Well, it is at the moment. So, but bear in mind, we do have odd records from time to time. So, if you're lucky, you might come across one. Again, it does actually like the same habitat as well. So in certain circumstances, you can see both. The emerald damselfly. This is a species that likes shallow ponds with lots of emergent vegetation. It is widespread, but it's not particularly common. You know, if you do see it, you do only tend to get small numbers at any site. It's one of the few damselflies which is in decline at the moment. We're not sure why, but numbers have seemed to have gone down in recent years. It may be that the sort of habitats drying up a lot, earlier than normal. This is one of these. This is a dragonfly with the shortest life cycle. It's the only one where the eggs laid and the adults emerge within the same year. So it's possible if the pond dries out before the adults emerge, it sort of might not survive. Now, it's a characteristic of several what are called emerald damselflies. If you look at it at rest, the wings are actually held at an angle to the body. And as its name suggests, the male is actually an emerald green colour with a sort of pale blue tip to the tail and pale blue on the thorax. The female is sort of slightly more robust insect, but again still metallic green. But there's no sort of blue on the abdomen or on the thorax. Now, the one thing to be aware of, in 2007, something called the willow emerald damselfly started to colonise the UK. And about 2 years ago, it turned up in South Cheshire, which is quite quick for an animal to get that far. So it's possible that I think we've perhaps had it in Lancashire at certain points. I know we've had it in Yorkshire. So it's worth looking out for if you're sort of out and about looking at green damselflies. It's easy to identify because it only turns up sort of late August and into September. And it's the only damselfly that's on the wing at that time of year. It's very similar to the emerald damselfly, but it doesn't have any blue on it. And it has obvious black and white spots at the end of the wings. So be interested to see who first records that for Merseyside. A bit of a challenge. Large red damselfly is usually the first damselfly to emerge, usually late April, or it might be earlier if the weather's warm enough. So it's quite a sizable damselfly, and it's red. There is a small red damselfly, which is a brighter red colour, but we don't get that this far north. That's mainly a species on the heathlands of southern England, and it never actually. The likelihood of it ever turning up here is very remote because it's one of these very sedentary insects. It's very rarely removed from its breeding site. I say it's found in most wetland habitats, so like most of these things, it avoids fast-flowing rivers. It tends to be mainly around ponds. It's very widespread, but in my experience, you don't really find huge numbers of them at any site. I mean, if you go to a site and see huge numbers of blue damselflies in particular flying over the water, but you might just find a small number of these tagging along. The male is sort of a deep red colour with these sort of black bands towards the tip and the yellow. You can't see it really. There's a yellow stripe on the side of the thorax. The female, like several damselfly species, has several colour forms, just to confuse things. But this is the one you're most likely to see. You can see the sort of black and yellow markings on the abdomen and the segments of the abdomen. I say there are some slight variations on this, but I say in this part of the world, that's the only red damselfly you're likely to see. So that's easily recorded. I say these, like most damselflies, it's on the wing till late July, early August. Now, the azure damselfly is one of, I think there's 7 blue damselflies in the UK. Fortunately, we only have 2 in Merseyside, so we don't need to worry about that. But the males in particular do look the same in a lot of species, so you need to sort of check these quite closely if you see them. It's a very widespread species, but it tends to prefer smaller ponds. And where you do find it, it tends to sort of stick around the edges. You very rarely see it flying out in the middle of the water. It seems to be sort of a bit less, not very adventurous, shall we say. So I say it's on the wing roundabout now. So it's probably one of our commonest. Well, it is one of our commonest damselflies. Now on this species, and there's several of the genus Synagrian, and what these species have in common, if you look just there, is that line on the thorax. We call that the Synagrian spur. That's what is referred to in the literature. So if you see that on the thorax of a blue damselfly, then it's of that genus. And unfortunately, we only have the azure in sort of Merseyside. Another feature to look at is if you look on segment 2, which is here, on the male in particular, it's got a sort of like a U shape. Sometimes it's stalked, sometimes it isn't. And if you look at the very tip, this what's described. It looks like a bit of a dicky bow type shape on the very last segment. So basically, if you think U and azure, that's one way to sort of remember what you're looking at. I say the female has got basically just green with these extensive black markings on the abdomen, but again you can see the black line on the thorax, which distinguishes this species. And the only other species locally you're likely to confuse it with is the common blue, which tends to prefer larger lakes and ponds, but you will find it. So you will find them both in the same place. So you can spend hours just trying to look at every little blue damselfly that flies past to work out whether you've got both species or just the one. That's where binoculars come in handy. It's probably the most widely distributed dragonfly in the UK, so hence the name common. Yeah, it's on the wing round from now on till September, so there's plenty of opportunity to see it. And unlike the azure damselfly, this can fly. It's happy to fly out in the middle of a pond. You can see it out over the open water. I mean, it's not a distinctive characteristic to look at, but it just gives you an idea that it's worth looking for this species. And as you say, this a different genus from the previous one. There's no spur on the thorax. That line is missing, and the blue sort of bands on the thorax on this species are quite broad compared to the azure. And if you look at the tip of the tail, there's no black markings on the last two segments. But the main feature to look at is segment 2 has got like a ball on a stalk. It's like a golf ball on a tee type shape. So that's what you're looking for common blue. So I was thinking ball blue. That's a way to sort of remember the two. The female has two colour forms. This is the green one. But if you see, they've got these. It's like it's sort of black with going to a point on the tops of the segments of the abdomen, and you've got this little triangle around that here. But again, you see no Synagrian spur of this species. So that's the way to tell the sort of two blue damselflies. It's unlikely that we'll get any more blue species for the foreseeable future, so you only need to worry about that. In Cheshire, we've got something called a variable damselfly, which is only found in Hatchmere, in Delamere Forest, which is again slightly different markings on the abdomen. But we know, so you've got three blue damselflies to look at on that site. And we've recently got the white-legged damselfly, which is another blue one, but that's only in a couple of places down in Sandbach in that sort of area. Whether or not that'll expand north, remains to be seen. Won't surprise me. It's been around for the last 3 or 4 years. as its name suggests, it does have white legs, which are sort of, well, they're pale legs at least, so it does stand out compared to the other ones. Blue-tailed damselfly, I say, has a blue tail. Very widespread, found in a range of lowland habitats. It can tolerate quite polluted waters, so sometimes you'll just get this species of damselfly on certain, habitats where the water quality is quite poor. So common throughout sort of the UK, generally sort of this time of year into August. Male is easy to identify. It's got sort of blue stripes on the thorax, and segment 8 is all blue. Now the female has, again, blue. That's either the segment 8 can be blue or brown, and they get various colour forms. There's about 5 colour forms. Basically, the thorax can be different colours. In this species, this form it's orange. You get purple, you can get red, you get various other colours. But this is the modern you're most likely to come across. I say it's any one. It used to be the only red blue-tailed damselfly we got in this area until a few years ago when this started turning up. Again, it's another one that's moving north fairly rapidly at the moment. I'm finding it in current, in new parts, new habit places in Cheshire fairly regularly. It's found on large ponds, lakes, canals, slow-flowing rivers. It has this habit of perching on floating leaves. If you've got water lilies or something like that, then that's a good place to look for this species. The male in particular will sit there and wait for either a female to come by or the prey to. And the female will actually sit on the leaves and lay her eggs in the water. Right. Obviously, as its name suggests, it's got, male in particular has got very obvious red eyes, and they actually do stand out, from a reasonable distance, especially. Even if you've got binoculars, several meters away, they are pretty obvious. The blue tip to the tail is slightly further back than on a blue-tailed damselfly, right at the very tip. But otherwise, the eyes are, on the male in particular, are the characteristic feature. You see the female is more of a green colour with sort of the eyes are slightly brown, more brownish, reddy colour. So that's the only one we know of in Merseyside. There is the small red-eyed damselfly on its way up north. I found that in Warrington last year, which is basically similar to this, but the blue tip to the tail is slightly different, and the wings are slightly shorter on that species. But it does have the bright red eyes as well. The one difference in behaviour for that one is it tends to settle on floating algae, the mats of horrible green stuff you see floating on tops of canals and ponds. That seems to like sitting on that. I mean, it's probably not a distinctive feature, but it's worth. If you see a dragonfly on that sort of plant, then it's always worth checking out. That's the way I found it anyway. I've gone to the sort of dragonflies, which is sort of, say, a bit more variety of these. The hawkers are the really big things. They're the ones that spend most of the time on the wing, flying up and down ponds and rivers and bits and other sort of habitats, chasing away anything else that comes near them. The common hawker is not that common. It's mainly a species of acid waters, peatlands, mosslands, that sort of area. And although it's quite localised, especially in this part of the world, the best place to see it would be, say, the mosses around St Helens, that sort of area, or South Lancashire, or Greater Manchester. So it's quite common there. Now, like several of the hawker species, it does actually stray quite regularly, so you can actually find it well away from its normal habitat. You can find these flying up and down woodland edges, or paths in woodlands, or if you're lucky, if you're in your garden occasionally. So they do tend to turn up sort of well outside the suitable habitat. Like most hawker dragonflies, it's on the wing sort of late June into September. So next few weeks it should start to emerge. I think it's very large damselfly. It's got the male in particular is quite distinctive. It's got these paired blue spots on the abdomen with sort of with slight pair of flecks, very sort of small spots just above them. And if you look at it there, you can see there's a slight wasted appearance. The abdomen goes a bit narrow before it widens out again. And other thing to look at on this, look for the antihumoral stripes. They're sort of yellow, and they do actually stand out quite well. The female, similar appearance, but the spots are sort of yellow or green, so you can't actually sort of tell sort of two apart just by looking at the spots on the abdomen. But the anti-stripes on the thorax are a lot less obvious than the female. Again, it's not one you'll see very often in Merseyside, unlike this one. Its name suggests it used to be a migrant till about 10 years ago, and then it sort of decided to settle. It's now probably one of our commonest dragonflies. It's quite late emerging, usually sort of up to August onwards. And if the weather's decent enough, it'll carry on into October or even November. So it's quite a late sort of flying insect. It's quite it's quite widespread now, especially seen throughout most of England. And any well-vegetated lake, pond, standing water is likely to have this species. And again, this is one that does tend to turn up in well away from its breeding sites. And the one thing about this species compared to the other hawker dragonflies is that it will actually stay still, whereas the other one tends most of the time flying up and down. This one regularly settles, and it can be quite approachable. I think that's one of mine I took in the garden. So you can get right up to it, and it'll just ignore you. It's slightly smaller than the other hawker dragonfly, so that's probably a bit of a giveaway. There is actually something called the southern migrant hawker, which is still a migratory species, but we have had that in Cheshire once or twice. I think it turned up at Hilbury a couple of years ago, so it's always worth looking out for that one. So it's usually late summer when that turns up. I say it's a sort of relatively small compared to the other hawker dragonflies. The feature you're looking at, for this species, if you look at that, there's an inverted triangle type shape just at the base of the thorax. And also you see that the anal appendages on this species are sort of quite long as well. So that's sort of quite a feature to look out for. But again, it's sort of, as far as the male's concerned, it's got paired blue spots on the abdomen, but unlike the southern hawker, there's no stripes on the thorax. And it's got obvious blue eyes if you sort of get close enough to it. Whereas the female, it's got smaller, yellower spots and green-brown eyes. I say these are, you can usually tell by size, compared to the rest of them, so it is noticeably smaller. The southern hawker is probably the commonest of the hawker dragonflies in this part of the world. You can find it in any well-vegetated water, even garden ponds. It's quite a range of sort of habitats you can find it. As its name suggests, it was quite common in south of the UK, but it's recently spreading north, and now it's moving up into Scotland. Again, it's late June into July when this will start appearing. This is one that does tend to wander. You'll find it almost anywhere. This is one that you come across quite regularly, sort of flying up down woodland paths or around your garden or whatever. It often flies quite high up as well, and can fly late into the day. You can see these things sort of just before dusk flying around, still hunting. So, unlike the rest, when all the rest they'll have gone to bed by then. The male is sort of a large damsel dragonfly. You'll notice sort of the first 8 segments have these sort of green paired spots, and then the final 2 it's the blue. That's the characteristic of that one. Also, to look at on this, you can see that there's 2 very obvious yellow-green spots just behind the head. They're characteristics of this species. Somebody said it gives the appearance of having headlights, that sort of thing. You see the effect there on the female as well, but these tend to be sort of all green. And again, the eyes tend to be slightly different colours, blue in the male and greenish in the female. The brown hawker, as its name suggests, is brown, both male and female. Again, it's another large hawker dragonfly. It'll emerge in sort of late this month. It's mainly common in lowland areas. It is a common dragonfly around here on most sort of fast, slow-flowing rivers or standing water bodies. The distinguishing feature for this dragonfly straight away is that the wings actually are brown compared to sort of all the other dragonflies. And the rest, obviously, you see the sort of, it is a brown insect. The only difference, the eyes on the male have got blue, they've got greenish brown in the female. There's no other sub-dragonfly which has that, the brownish wings, so it's very easy to identify. Just the only other brown damned dragonfly we do have is something called a Norfolk hawker, which is brown but with pale wing, translucent wings. So I mention it because it used to be found in Norfolk, but again it's sort of spread out quite considerably in the last few years, and it has actually been found at a site in Greater Manchester. So it's not that far away. So again, something to perhaps look out for in future years. The Emperor is our largest dragonfly. That's about 4 inches long. It's on the wing around about now and sort of into August. It's found in a variety of habitats, and this is very common throughout this part of the world. If you go back 30 years when I started looking at dragonflies, the only place you could find emperors was on the Sefton coast. Now they're sort of all over Cheshire, they're all over Lancashire, they're all over Merseyside. So it has done very well expanding. It's one that, like the other hawker dragonflies, it tends not to stray very far from its breeding sites. The male and female, the male in particular, tends to set up its own territory and it'll chase off anything that comes near it. They seem to sort of just spend the day just flying around chasing off other dragonflies. The male is quite very obvious turquoise blue, and they've got both sexes got an obvious bright green thorax, whereas the female is sort of greenish. Although you can get blue forms of the female, but they're sort of very uncommon. And you see both sexes have got this black stripe down the top of the abdomen. So you can usually tell by the sort of, it's a big bulky dragonfly that's flying very fast up and down a pond or a lake or whatever. I say it's not one you're likely to miss. I say it's started to emerge round about now, so it's worth looking out for this on any ponds or canals you happen to be around. The four-spotted chaser is a sort of medium-sized dragonfly. It's also the first one to emerge, usually sort of mid-May onwards. Usually disappeared by August. This is one of the few dragonflies where the male and female actually look the same. The only way you can actually tell apart is to look at the anal appendages at the tip of the abdomen, or if you see a pair mating, obviously the male's on top and the female's underneath, or the female will be the one laying eggs. I say it's quite common throughout a range of habitats. It's unlike the hawker dragonflies, these do tend to spend a lot of time perched on vegetation in the pond, whatever. And you can see on here the four spots refer to the spots halfway along the top of the wing. No other dragonfly has that. Occasionally there is a sort of slight variation in the colour of the spots, but that's quite rare. So the rest of it's sort of a brownish, olive brown colour with a sort of black tip to the abdomen. You also notice sort of blackish base to the hind wings as well, which is characteristic of quite a few of the chaser species. The broad-bodied chaser is another early emerging dragonfly, usually sort of early May. Prefers sort of ponds, small lakes and ditches. This one's well known because it's usually the first dragonfly to colonise any new water body. If you dig yourself a pond in the garden or dig yourself a new wetland, then this is often the first dragonfly you'll see coming in to sort of take advantage of it. It usually stays around for a few years and then it might move on. So its name suggests it's got a flattened, quite broad abdomen. And also you notice the very dark bases to all four wings. And sort of the male, if an adult male in particular, is a very sort of bright turquoisey blue. So you're not going to distinguish that, mistake that for anything else. The female is sort of this yellowy brown colour, but just be aware an immature male is also that colour for the first few days until it sort of gets the blue colour develops. So you might get a bit of a female, what looks like a female with bits of patches of blue on the abdomen. So that's sort of got to be a male adult eventually. But I'll say the dark wing base is distinctive for the species. So it's another medium-sized dragonfly. So. Black-tailed skimmer is related to the chasers. It's another medium-sized dragonfly. This one used to be locally common throughout southern England until about 20 years ago, and now it's one of our commonest dragonflies. It's found in a variety of habitats, and it does take advantage of man-made waterways in particular. You'll find it in gravel pits, where they've extracted clay, and you often see it perched on areas of exposed mud or earth at the side of a water body. It's one of the few that does actually spend a lot of its time on the ground. So the male is sort of a pale blue colour with a sort of dark tip to the abdomen. Well, the adult male anyway. This is a female and an immature male. They both look the same, but eventually, obviously, the male will sort of develop its blue colour eventually, blue colour with the black tip. It's got like a sort of ladder appearance along the abdomen with two dark black lines with sort of these lines joining it. I say it's starting to emerge round about now. So if you go around sort of any old man-made waterway, that's one to look for. Black darter is our smallest dragonfly. It's about 3 centimetres long, if that. It's another one that likes acidic water bodies, so it's mainly found in lowland heath, moorland, peatland, that sort of area. It's locally common throughout the UK. Sort of starts to emerge. They'll start to emerge next month. So again, the peatlands, mosslands around that St Helens are the places to look for this one. Although it does actually turn up on, odd ones will turn up on other sites where they're not expected. So don't be surprised if you do see it straying into somewhere which isn't its normal habitat. So as its name suggests, the male is black, basically. See, there's no way you're going to mistake that for anything else. Just a size will just give it away because it's that small. Adult female is sort of this orangey yellow colour with black underneath. So again, you're not going to say the size will mean you're not going to distinguish, mistake that for anything else. Common darter is our commonest dragonfly. It's a medium-sized insect found almost anywhere throughout the UK and on any habitat. Basically, it's as the name suggests, it is that common. It is starting to emerge round about now, so it's one to look out for in the next few weeks. And given the right weather, it'll continue to fly into November or even later, if it doesn't get too cold. So it's probably got the longest flight period of any of our dragonflies. And again, it's another one that'll turn up almost anywhere. You'll often find it perched on a branch or any other exposed bit where it can warm up in the, I always find if you look on wooden fence posts, that's a good place to find this species. It does tend to spend a lot of its time sat there and just fly off when an insect comes or if you just get too close to it. So the male is sort of mainly a reddish brown colour with sort of yellow sides to the thorax. Whereas the female is sort of this ochre colour. I say it's by far the commonest, but just be aware we do get the ruddy darter, which is by a lot sort of less common, but we do get it in sort of various parts of Cheshire and Merseyside and Lancashire. So it's very similar in size to the common darter, but it tends to prefer more acidic or brackish conditions. But you will find them both on the same water body at certain times of the year. So the male in particular is bright red. It is an obvious colour difference between that and the common darter. But the main feature to look out for is he's got, if you look at the tip of the abdomen, these sort of two black markings on the very last two segments. And it also has all black legs as well. That's a distinguishing feature in relation to the common darter. Whereas the female is sort of ochre colour with sort of black markings down the side. And again, you see the last two segments with that black mark on them. Also, if you look at the male in particular, the abdomen round about there has an obvious waist to it. It does tend to narrow before it gets wider again. I say it's a lot less common than the sort of common darter, but it is worth looking out for. Now, obviously, as I'm saying, there's quite a few odd ones that you will come across, and which will potentially colonise Merseyside in the next few years or so. The red veined darter, which is this one, you see it's got the reddish area at the base of the wings. This has actually bred on Merseyside on a number of occasions. It's normally a vagrant, but occasionally you get enough insects turning up that they can set, there's enough for them to set up a small breeding population. But fortunately, it tends not to last too long. So, like I say, it's obviously worth keeping an eye out for. So this is a small red-eyed damselfly. It's very similar to the red-eye, but you see the eyes aren't as bright red on this one. And then you've got the beautiful Damselflies there, that's a male with all the all blue wings. Now, as far as recording concerned, which is what we're all about, I mean, ideally, the British Dragonfly Society, which is the national charity for, like the RSPB for dragonflies, basically, they prefer you sort of send your records in using iRecord if you're familiar with that, but iNaturalist will do just as well. Or failing that, just send them to your local record centre or county recorder on a spreadsheet. That's probably the easiest thing, and let somebody else worry about converting it into something usable. So that's trying to get as many records as possible, so you know how the distribution and numbers of our species are sort of increasing or declining. And obviously, there are lots of books out there, to to help you. There's a few around there you can have a look at, which give you that, are really, a lot of them are really useful to use. I recommend the Britain's Dragonflies on the left because it's got information about the adults as well. Also, it's information about the larvae as well, so it covers all stages and obviously sort of the obvious FSC fold out field guide, which is very useful because it doesn't take up much room when you go out with all your other FSC fold out field guides. I say there's plenty of others. A lot of them, just be aware, do actually cover Britain and Europe. So they can be a bit of confusing if you're sort of not familiar with what you're looking at. And these are the sort of links to the British Dragonfly